Greetings, everybody. So glad you're here with us today. Welcome to today's webinar about establishing statewide mentor-teacher networks. My name is Kendra, and I'm a community designer and manager here at 100K in 10. And before we get started today, we just wanted to share a quick overview of what 100K in 10 is, and a little bit of insight about the project team program, which are some of the folks you'll hear from today. So really briefly, quick overview of 100K in 10. We are a network that unites the nation's top academic institutions, nonprofits, foundations, companies, and government agencies to recruit and retain 100,000 excellent STEM teachers nationwide, while addressing the underlying systemic challenges that have contributed to the shortage of excellent STEM teachers and have made that shortage so pervasive. We call these systemic challenges the grand challenges, and we invite you to learn more about them by going to 100kn10.org. Today on this webinar, you'll hear from leaders in our network who have been working together on a 100K in 10 project team. And you'll get to connect with others from across the network and beyond who are really interested in digging into this topic. And you'll get to hear in detail about the project that the team has been working on. Project teams are small groups of 100K in 10 partners and invited guests who collaborate on a discrete, time-bound project to address the grand challenges underlying that shortage of excellent STEM teachers that we're working to tackle. And today's webinar is led by a project team that's been working together since the beginning of 2018. And they've been working on developing a framework that states can use to build networks of STEM peer mentor teachers. So let's get started. Welcome. Very quickly, before I hand over the mic to the project team hosting today's webinar, I wanted to share just a quick couple of housekeeping notes. So first is that we invite you to participate. We are trying out kind of a different, more interactive and participatory approach to a webinar. And we really hope that today will help plant a seed for you to think more about how you could adapt or try out this framework that's being introduced today, or that you hear from somebody else in the webinar who you'd like to stay connected to after the webinar ends. So we'd really love to hear from you. We encourage everybody who's on the webinar today to contribute at least one perspective if you're able to. We really want you to feel like this webinar is a leverage point, it's a jumping off point for more conversation after we wrap today. A couple of technical housekeeping notes. As you can see, we're using the Zoom platform for today's webinar. And we wanted to just point out, you'll see that your audio is muted today. And really, we're doing that to help reduce the background noise and echo so we can make sure we can tune in and listen to the webinar host really well. And because we're going to be a pretty decent sized group of people today, we invite you to open up the chat box. So that will be the place where most of our discussion will happen today. And if you're not already in the chat, you can hover to the bottom of the Zoom window, and there's a little box that says chat, and you can click it and it will open the chat box. One tip I'd like to offer is that if you're in a full screen mode right now, where you can see this housekeeping slide and it's taking up your whole screen, you can try pressing escape on your keyboard, and that will allow you to see both the slides and the chat at the same time. And you can also take a look at the videos that are of everyone who's joining us today. And we definitely encourage you to turn on your video if you're feeling comfortable and willing. We feel like it really enables the conversation for us to be able to see who y'all are and encourage us to keep in touch afterwards. So to use the chat feature, you'll see at the bottom of the chat box, there's a space for you to write your message, and it'll say to everyone. And if you'd like to send a direct message to us on the team, you'll see there a bunch of users that have the 100K in 10 username today, but you can feel free to direct message us, either me at 100K in 10 Kendra, or Mabel or Lauren or anybody who has the 100K10 user will get that message. And just if you're going to participate back in the discussion, you'll just keep an eye to toggle back to everyone. So we wanted to quickly mention that this webinar is going to be recorded and shared so that lots of other folks can learn about this framework later. We are going to be sharing most of our discussion in the chat box, as we mentioned, and the chat won't be included in the recording. So we just wanted to share that with you so that you can be mindful about what you're sharing today. But because most of what we'll be discussing will be in the chat, just keep in mind, sometimes we know that you might want to not share things that are under wraps at your organization yet, things like that. And we really hope that you'll stay through the end of the webinar. We're going to be doing a very quick feedback survey, and your input is really helpful for us as we think about doing many more webinars. We have 11 more webinars slated before the end of the year, and your feedback is really important to us. And finally, if you are not, if you didn't register through a form, and if you didn't get an email from me yesterday, we'd love to just stay in touch with you and make sure that you're able to get the link to this project team's output and also the recording after the webinar. So just feel free to send me a quick email at kendra@100kand10.org, or you can feel free to direct message us your contact info. And you'll get that follow-up email tomorrow with the webinar recording and a link to the framework. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to the Mentor Teacher Network's project team to take it away.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Jenny Hicks. I'm the Director of K-12 STEM Engagement at Purdue University, and I led this project team along with Jeff Thomas, who is with us today. Presenting today is myself, Melanie Narish from Great Hearts Academy. She's the talent officer there, and Jeff Thomas, who's a professor at the University of Southern Indiana. The other parts of our team, by the way, this was a great team and we all worked really hard and closely together. So even though these folks aren't here, they gave 100%. So I want to acknowledge them. Demi Dubois, the project coordinator of Focus on Mathematics at Boston University. Paul Parkinson, a professor at University of North Florida. Jody Peterson, the Assistant Executive Director of Communication at Legislative and Public Affairs at NSTA, and Camille Stegman, the Executive Director of the Nevada State Science Teachers Association. So we've already gone through the first part of the agenda, housekeeping, introductions. Right now we want to talk about what your connection to this work is, because really, this work will only get better with your input and the input of your colleagues. We can't go forward very far without the input of folks from states and districts that are going to utilize this work. And the only way we'll know how to make it better is from your experience. So we'd like to know what your connection to this work is. Let me give a little bit of background about our goals when we started this work. Our goal was to establish a framework for mentor-teacher networks. So by saying that, I mean something that states and districts, schools could follow that would be like a template, a roadmap for them to use when they wanted to establish their own networks. We know now that in the United States there is a teacher shortage crisis, but we really believe that it's not a shortage crisis. We believe that it's a retention crisis. So we believe there are plenty of teachers in STEM, but that the issue is that they're not retained because they don't get good support. And we believe that support should come in the form of mentoring. And the connection to this at 100K10 is the grand challenge in teacher leadership and professional growth. So I think that's about that. And so as part of this discussion, please, we want to do via chat, not out loud, but in the chat, share your name, what you do, and why you're interested in this topic. And we're going to monitor that, and we will, we're watching it right now. And so we will then highlight that and bring that out as you're typing in the chat box. So please right now, put your name, what you do, and why you're interested in this topic in the chat box. Some of them are coming up, I see. Okay, there's Diane O'Grady from the Maryland Center for Computing Education, Earl Lakelighter. So Emily, you said you're late, so go ahead and put your name, what you do, and why you're interested in this topic in the chat box.
And if possible, put all three things together so we can have them bunched.
Good idea, Melanie. So I see that Sarah Torres is joining us from the Arizona Science Teachers Association. She said that they had a teacher leadership program. Maybe Sarah, you could comment about, it looks like that's past tense. So what happened to that program? You can either type it or you could unmute yourself and say it out loud.
It might be quicker for me to unmute. Can you hear me, Jenny?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep, good job.
We had grant funding to support it for numerous years, and part of the sustainability plan was to have districts continue to pay for it and lessen the grant funding. And with professional development funds decreasing, the districts are choosing not to support that program. And so we just finished our last cohort this, right now, actually in August. And due to the lack, we only had 2 teachers who signed up for this next year. And so we're doing some other things with them. But to really have a nice network of support, we needed more than just 2 teachers to participate. And they were experienced teachers, and they wanted to mentor new teachers. So that's kind of where we were at. So that when districts started just not putting their money into that type of program, even though they say it's important.
Right. So that's a major issue. I'm really glad you brought that up, because we will talk about compensation and funding and what are some of those sources that you can turn to and how you can structure those programs so that districts will view them as not only essential, but also fundable.
I also see that Jessica, she put down that leadership in science education is a priority in their strategic plans, and they have a leadership event held annually. I'm hoping that lens that you have later will also be having an opportunity to ask questions and give feedback. And so I'm very curious how your experiences with that leadership event might help us fine tune and improve this layout. So thank you for adding that note.
I also see that someone has joined us from Fort Hays State University, and they work with rural STEM teachers. And I think that encouraging and supporting leadership in rural schools is very important and is very challenging, because 20% of our student population in the United States is in a rural school. So while we don't specifically address that, I do think that this type of mentoring framework can be adapted and adjusted for those in rural schools as well.
Darcy noted that she's been getting feedback from teachers, and teachers are mentioning that lack of mentorship is a factor about factoring into retention. I was wondering, Darcy, could you add a note? Did you get any indication on what type of mentorship, or when a teacher thinks of mentoring, what do they visualize? What are they hoping to get?
So I'm going to jump in since it looks like Darcy might have trouble unmuting. I want to just quickly talk about administration because we don't directly address that in this framework, but that is something we've been talking about because we think administration is key to the success of this program if you decide to adopt it. So that is something we're going to look at down the line, training specifically for administrators. We've done a little bit of work in that area in the work that we do in Indiana, but we haven't put it into the framework yet because we just haven't finished exploring that. So that's something that's going to be in the works in the future.
Cherry mentioned that she helps with building teacher leadership through their NGSS Squadsters. Cherry, do you want to unmute yourself? What's a Squadster? I'm curious because it sounds like you're working on a really large level and a big scale and trying to reach different areas, which might have a lot of overlap in our presentation.
So yeah, through Carnegie Foundation, we have been doing grant work for a few years now, pulling together teachers from across the country who commit to growing as STEM educators. And part of the agreements include, posting themselves as they do their practice in their classrooms, as well as attending some national conferences. So it's really kind of comprehensive and working on growing both their confidence in what they're doing and then their skill set as well, and then connecting them in a way that they kind of continue to make their connections well past when we're initiating the contact.
What tools or what elements do you think have allowed for that connection to continue the momentum?
Well, I think it's probably a multi-pronged approach. I mean, we have, they do it virtually, so we have a platform that supports the collaboration. We do a lot of video work, video analysis, which allows for them, again, to be virtual and still have connectivity. In addition, lots of promotion of social media and just kind of making sure they're establishing their own voices as they promote their work and what they're learning. So those things I think have helped. And then they present. We sponsor them when they go to conferences and present the work that they've been doing.
Thank you. And then Darcy, sorry for the confusion with that. Thank you for typing in. Do you want to, Darcy, do you want to pop in and unmute and share your response?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. No, you had asked about what types of mentorship. We've been hearing anything from assistance with navigating systems all the way through to, more in-depth content support or support with planning and assessing students, especially with project-based learning.
And what do you mean by synchronous and asynchronous supports? What are you talking about there?
Oh, well, I was curious because of related to the rural question as well, just what are some of the different options and maybe in the planning, if you've discussed, we hear a lot about isolation with rural teachers in particular. So I wasn't sure if there were, if you've had some conversations about both synchronous, in real time mentoring options, and then also if there anything has come up about asynchronous as well.
Good question.
I can speak to that a little bit. In the framework, we don't specifically say that it has to be either or, but in the project that we work on in Indiana, we do both if you choose to, but we use a video platform that it's in the framework. We mention it that allows this to be asynchronous. Doesn't have to be synchronous. It can be whenever you have time to log on and watch the video of the lesson, or you could be in person, the teacher can be in your school. So in a way you have to adjust to whatever your situation is and figure out what works best. And we found that is to be true throughout the state. Well, I think maybe we've had a lot of great discussion. I really appreciate it. And if you have other questions or things come up, please put them in the chat and we will respond to those. I don't know that we got to everything, but I think our time is about up on this part. And so I think we need to move on to the next slide. Am I correct?
And I'll take it from here. So I'm
Thank
Mel
you.
Marriage. There's some other Melanies here. Woo! And a lot of Arizona folks. So hello, everybody in Arizona. I think I skipped forward one too far. Okay, so as Jenny mentioned earlier, our framework has a larger vision, and we're going to be next giving you the background of what the framework is. But I just want to reiterate what she mentioned before on this idea that the framework is a tool designed for this greater goal of building confidence, building the skill set, and hopefully building community among STEM teachers to hopefully bring more joy to the profession, and then have more retention and more intrigue in even becoming a science teacher because it is a rich community. And so that's our goal. And this framework is something, and thinking about some of the comments that came up, is a very general skeleton that we can add on to. And so that translation, I'm looking forward to at the end, we'll be having more time to discuss. And then once we give this framework, hopefully we can dig into maybe some of those topics of, for instance, rural locations and what this could look like and the important next steps in order to facilitate and help folks in different situations to get to that. But if we scale back, with that said, this framework, we developed a project that's called Establishing Statewide STEM Mentor Teacher Networks. And the screenshot you have is of our project. This project, the framework itself, will be emailed, as Kendra mentioned, so that way you can take a closer look. But to summarize, we have three major goals that we'll be discussing today. The first is developing a framework to identify and select mentors and mentees, then developing a framework to train both of them, both mentors and mentees, and then finally developing a compensation plan to implement a mentor network. So taking a look more closely at goal 1, especially in the pilot year, when trying to do something new, like a framework, you need to get the right people on the bus. So getting individuals that are equally as enthusiastic can set this framework up for success, because there's going to be kinks, there's going to be things to work out. So if you have lots of individuals with a growth mindset that are eager to try this out, work it out, and make it just that much better and that much more specialized to whatever district or region it's being used, that's going to let everything else in future years just get better and better, which is, the goal. So when we're looking for mentors and mentees, we're looking for a certain level of expertise, disposition, and skills. So taking a look at mentors specifically, we would like mentors to be experts. And there's various ways that this can be measured. And once again, keeping the idea that this is a framework, it depends on the group, the district, it could be a charter network. There's a lot of different ways this can be looked at. But it could be because they're licensed, because they're experienced, recommended by leadership, or observed by the individuals that are leading the framework. And then the disposition, I have an all caps mentor. Jeff came up with a really nice acronym, thinking of some of the disposition elements that a mentor should have. Magnanimous, which I practiced pronouncing beforehand, and I mispronounced pronouncing. Okay. Engaging, nurturing, thoughtful listener, ownership, and responsive. The mentor should also have different skills. One skill they'll definitely need is communication. If they have wonderful teaching skills, if they know professional development, but they can't communicate to another adult, which teaching adults is very different than teaching students in demeanor, that's a really unique skill set that needs to be sought after in a mentor. And then also they should be somebody that has a lot of experience with professional development. On the flip side, the mentees, we do want the same things, but just different scales. So for instance, the the individual, the criteria, they should be somebody that's self-selected. They essentially have that desire and buy-in already, and are newer. The mentee should be new in some element. It doesn't mean that they're straight out of school, ready to teach. It could be somebody who's been teaching for years, but maybe they switched grades, or maybe they switched content areas. So somebody that's new in some level would be a good start. However, long-term vision, anybody who wants to grow in their field, this might be a really good opportunity. We're just suggesting as a starter, this might be the most useful category of individuals. Their disposition should be motivated, somebody that's not just looking for a solution to be given to them, but somebody that's ready to jump in and realizes that that struggle, that pursuit is what will help them grow. And they're looking for somebody to be with them through that process. And then finally, the mentee also has to have communication skills that is not a passive participant, but active and ready to participate on a regular basis. So with that idea of having these individuals and gathering these individuals, which once when we're talking about framework, we're giving those ideas, but each region would have a specific system that they could work through, knowing their leadership structures and things like that. Once we get the folks that we need together, I'll pass it off to Jeff to talk about goal 2.
Yeah, hello everyone. So when working with these teachers, of course, we have some new teachers in the mentees, and then we have some experienced veterans, very focused, motivated teachers in the mentors. So getting them together is going to be very dynamic. And a couple of you have asked some questions leading up to the webinar today and in your registration packet. And so you'll see your names highlighted on the screen right now. And I wanted to make a specific point to address those questions because they are naturally integrated into the work that we've been doing over the last 6 to 9 months. Sarah and Diane talked about, how does this work? Who's going to do the training? And if it's going to be a large statewide effort, someone's going to have to be in charge at the top. And then you're most likely going to hire some consultants unless someone has the internal time to prepare for it, the internal experience and expertise to deliver the training. But at the local level, if it's going to be implemented, depending on the amount of money and funds you have to dedicate to it, you might have some internal folks that can help lead to it. But they're certainly going to need to have the dispositions and the characteristics that Mel alluded to earlier on the previous screen. But specifically, our framework calls for a 2-year training effort, and that would occur beginning in the summer, and for some districts, hiring those late teachers, establishing that mentee cadre is going to occur late in August, or I should say early in August, late in the summer. Most likely what we believe is that if you're going to have a large effort across the state, you're going to want to centralize your training. When you start breaking up into districts and trying to coordinate the types of professional development for the mentors, you're going to lose a little bit of quality control. And the idea is that trainers and mentors, as they go through the training, that they're going to need to understand something specific around any of the STEM areas, but also around the mentoring issues. And we've set it up in 5 cafeteria type sessions right now. We're going to go ahead and add 2 more sessions. They're in development. I'll talk about that as I finish here in a moment. But the first session is working with training. On the upper right of your screen, you'll see 2 teachers working with video. Megan, and then I saw Earl posted a comment earlier about the rural settings. One of the promises of video is that it can help teachers in rural settings and in some other types of settings as well, where you might only have one teacher in a science in a middle school setting. And so video, capturing video of a lesson has several advantages. One, it gives the teacher that's being videoed more control over what they're trying to video. It allows them to revisit the video. It allows more flexibility in observing it by the mentor. And everyone seems to favor that whenever people research it. And we looked into some of the research around video. So those are definitely some advantages. And if we are to use video, it allows us to choose our mentors, the observers of the video for the new teachers, for reasons other than just being right next door to the mentee teacher. I might choose a teacher across town, across the county, because of their experience and their background in the subject matter or the grade level that we're trying to work with the new teacher. So that's session one, is setting up the technology. We found that teachers, when they know they're going to use technology, they want to get at that right away and understand that. Sessions 2 and 3, Becky had asked, well, what were some of the mistakes that you made and some of the lessons that you learned? Well, one of the, I won't call it a mistake, but one of the drawbacks that we learned early on was that the first summer we were working with some mentors, we focused on some STEM teaching skills. And they said, well, we kind of already got that. We've been focused on that. We've been involved with our curriculum mapping and PD for years. What we really need are the soft skills of mentoring. And so we were able to start infusing more of those into the training for the teachers. And you'll see that now embedded in the framework. And examples of that would be like better conversations, 10 habits of effective instructional coaching, reflective listening, asking better questions, redirecting toxic conversations. Those are the types of skills that the mentors desired. They appreciated the STEM specific work, but that's not what they needed in the day-to-day interactions with their mentees. Some of and so switching to those soft skills of mentoring was something that we got right. We also dealt with technology issues. The specific platform that we have, mentee teachers uploaded a video to a secure platform and then shared it with their mentor. The mentor could watch the video, and then there could be an online dialogue back and forth. And then often they would connect face-to-face for a debrief about that if it was possible. And so some of the things that we got right were just dealing with that technology. We learned a lot, and there will be problems with that. And so in sessions 4 and 5, and again, all of these are cafeterias, so they don't have to occur in order, but we believe this is the best order. Sessions 4 and 5 currently would have mentor teachers look at unpacking the standards based around their local expectations, their local policies and standards, and then helping mentees the next day do that as well, so that they could understand things like the content boundaries that exist in the standards. What we want to do in the next phase is to develop a collaborative lesson study so that they can learn something together, and the mentees can see that even mentors are also learning new things, and it would give them that shared experience. We're just not ready to roll that out specifically without piloting it first. So that's, in a very brief overview, 4 or 5 minutes, what the framework of training looks like, starting with technology that they're going to use to capture lessons, and then the soft skills of mentoring, and then very local specific issues that would relate to their classroom grade level in school districts.
Okay, so I think this is my turn. I'm going to talk a little bit about compensation methods, because this has been a major part of the grant that we currently have, obviously because we had to have a grant to get this going, so there had to be a funding source. So if you don't have a grant, as the person that spoke early on from Arizona Science Teacher Association, if you don't have a grant, how do you pay for this, and what should the structure be? It can be pretty complicated. So we gave an example here of what the primary and secondary costs might be for a 1-year implementation of this program. Before I get to that, I want to make a comment about that, and that is that why should teachers be compensated? So I'm going to comment on that because I've seen posted in a variety of places, both statewide and nationwide, that many organizations, ironically it's those that are not teachers but those that are administrators, feel that teachers should not be additionally compensated because it's part of their job. Now, I would argue the reverse, that they should be compensated for the time they spend outside the classroom doing things that are professionally related, and that will elevate them to a professional status that they currently don't have. Because if we expect teachers to do more for less, then we're not elevating them to a professional status. And that's what the subcontext of this is, that we are providing a pathway for a career ladder for teachers to advance, while currently there is not one. So in general, and there's also been discussion about should mentors and mentees be compensated. Well, mentors are the master teachers. They're the ones who have been in the district for 5, 10. The average teacher in our program is 13 years in the district at the same school. So we felt that we would focus our efforts on compensating mentors. Mentees still do get compensated and they get release time, but they are not compensated at the same rate as the mentor is. So that is just something we chose to do. Again, it's very flexible. So in general, so this model is giving your mentors an annual stipend, and for that work, they are to they have a set of expectations in order to meet that stipend. They are also given a stipend for attending professional development. And again, that may seem like, well, why would you give a separate stipend? Well, the bottom line is that everyone's summers are very busy. And if you want them to attend, you have to provide them with a way for them to offset other things in the summer that might be more attractive, like summer school or consulting work or another job they had to take to support themselves. So unfortunately, teachers are not making enough money. And so you have to entice them by providing a summer stipend, both the mentor and the mentee, I should say. Then there's the provider cost. It could be zero if you're pulling from within the district, or it could be quite expensive if you're looking at an outside consultant from outside your state. We kind of use a mix of that. So we have some higher education folks. We have some folks that have specialized at the district level. They're now retired or moved on, but they at one point were at the district level. So we have a variety of folks, and there's a variety of compensation for them. But you should plan on anywhere from zero up to, say, $10,000. I would say that's about a ballpark. And then for the subscription video platform, it's actually not that expensive, but the more you purchase, the cheaper it gets. So it's about $135 per license, and that's a 1-year license. And they provide a lot of support that you may not get if you would do this like on some type of free service. So they have a lot of support. They'll even transcribe your videos, and it's a manual transcription. So if you do want to do research on that, or if your teacher needs that, these are privately shared though. So if your teacher would elect to use it as part of evaluation purposes, they would have to make that selection. So there's a lot of features in a paid service that are going to give you a lot more bang for the buck than if you were to use something free. I know there are free things out there, like you could use YouTube, for example, but the privacy and the sharing and the cataloging of the videos is not, there's no comparison really. And then these are the optional costs that would enhance your program, or perhaps there are things that you think are important. So to provide mentees a stipend, we linked it to the number of reflections that they did, so the number of lessons they recorded. So if you do 1, 2, 3, our maximum our mentees do is 4. And that may seem low, but it seemed to be kind of a middle ground for us. We started with 6 and then we ended up with 4. And we tied their compensation to the submission of the video reflection, the video and the video reflection. And then you have to take into account travel. Jeff talked about centralizing the training. We did that eventually, because if you do trainings across the state or across many districts and you can't clone your providers, you're going to get a different level of quality in content each time you try to replicate that with different people. So we felt it was much more cost and time effective, and it provided better quality to bring everybody together. And so that's what we did. So you have to account for travel and, other outside kind of expenses that are related to that. One thing that's not in here, which I would also recommend, is that it's good to provide, I think it is in here, but I do see it. Maybe I can't see for sure, but you need to account for release time. We did not originally, and then we ended up providing release time because teachers need to observe each other during the school day, and both mentor and mentee goes both ways. So we found that the mentor, it's really important for the mentee to observe the mentor, because that brings down the barrier of saying, oh, I'm willing to have you watch me, or at least make a video of their classroom. So there needs to be some time in the school day. That can be part of the school schedule, but unfortunately in most districts, it's not. So if it's occurring during the school day and they don't teach at the same, they teach at different times, you're going to have to get subs, allow them to release a work together and move it forward.
Okay, in a moment.
I think. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so in a moment we're going to open this up to questions for the group, but I wanted to address two more questions that were outstanding that Diane and Emily had brought up, because they're good questions, and I thought that they would also, I've seen them in a different version in the chat sessions with questions and topics that were people bringing up. You know, one, what about support for the mentors? And the mentors obviously are there to support the mentees, and the mentees may need a bit of support from the project, I'll call whoever that team would be leading it. But the mentors need regular check-ins, and they need regular opportunities to meet. Mel can address specifically some social media opportunities that they've used in Arizona. But being able to use a Facebook group or some things like that is one option. But sometimes if the mentors can meet face-to-face, and we have established quarterly meetings at times where the mentors could get together and provide them not just motivational support, but also technical support about things when they can talk through some issues. And then another question was, what about assessing mentors? Well, clearly we do not want this to be evaluative in nature, that it's about, you know, their salary or their teacher rating of some sort. So one of the rubrics that you'll see inside the document was a mentor self-assessing rubric that mentors in Indiana helped build. Matter of fact, they built it. We led them through the process, and you'll see some criteria at which they believe, and this would be a group of about 60 mentors, that they helped put together an assessment rubric to demonstrate their effectiveness or helpfulness in moving a mentee forward. And it has everything to do with showing empathy, to taking leadership opportunities in the school, to being present, to providing resources. Again, that's in the document. And so now we want to open it up, and Mel is going to filter questions that you may have, or comments or ideas that you think would be helpful for the group to hear.
Yeah, if you could please, if you have any questions, I mean, one of the great perks, we have actually a couple of questions that if it's crickets, we can definitely talk about. But one of the great things that 100K and 10 is providing is this opportunity for us to connect with each other. And so we've been stewing in this for months, and having your fresh eyes is fantastic. So what are some questions and ideas? Start popping those in the chat. While you're putting those in there, I can finish that thought that Jeff brought up of connecting the mentors and support for the mentors. In our framework, we have a table at the end that lists the pros and cons of different social media platforms and the ways that they can be used. And I know that a lot of districts have certain techniques or media platforms that they prefer, for instance, like Facebook, but others might really be able to use Slack. Slack is actually something that I hadn't even heard of until I started doing things with 100K and 10, and now I'm completely hooked, and we do a lot of projects together with Slack in our professional development areas. And so feel free to take a look when the framework is emailed out at the different media platforms and how it might be useful for district facilitators and mentors to work together, mentors and mentors to work together, mentors and mentees to work together. And you could use a different mix, whatever would work best for an individual. So that idea, going back to this is a framework, we really want to make it so that it's almost like an activation energy, so it feels comfortable of going, okay, now I know what this could look like. How is it going to look like for us? That's that next step. I see some questions coming in. Diane asks, do you include any of online support between the mentors and mentees? And that one might refer back to the, Diane, are you thinking about online support as in technical support, or online support as in a format for them to talk to, like those social media platforms? Diane, if you want to unmute yourself, you can clarify.
I was just wondering about, you know, when they have questions in between times, a place to leave questions. Would people have questions in common that, like on a Slack channel, everybody could see the answers to? Or do you kind of, you know, in some way provide a way that a mentee can reach, can they reach only their own mentor, or can they reach another mentor if they have a question kind of in the middle of the week or something like that?
That's a great question. And that's something that we actually fiercely debated in multiple formats, because teachers, we surveyed even teachers asking, you know, what would you prefer? And some people are, you know, email only. I don't want to do anything outside of email. Some people wanted to use media platforms. So I think that's something that does need to be addressed. There has to be a solution for that. And it might depend on the culture and the community that's there. So our framework tries to give some options. It's definitely not a complete list. So any other ideas that you have, we would love feedback, and our emails, I'm sure, are going to be in the email that will be sent out in the end. So if you have other ideas that we can add to it, that would be great. Let's see, there's another question. How do mentors track FaceTime with their mentee? How many mentees does each mentor support? Jeff, Jenny, do either of you want to talk about that?
I can. So we've tried a different kinds of ratios, and here's the one thing about this framework and about our program that I want to emphasize. These are full-time classroom teachers. We have a very few, like maybe one or two people who transition to be coaches, which is kind of nice because they were in this program and then they moved up the ladder and now they're a coach for the district, so they're not a teacher. But really, we want the mentor to be a full-time teacher. So that means their time is limited. So we do not want them to take on more than 2 mentees. Some of them have 3, but I tell them it's up to them. They have to be able to handle it. So that's optional. So maximum 2. Some have 1, but we kind of go with the two mentees. And Jeff's clarifying that. Yep. And then what was the second part of that? What's the threshold for what you consider to be an effective amount of time? Interaction-wise, we don't tell them how much they need to interact, but in our rubric, you will see that there's certain criteria that will sort of define that interaction and that you can self-reflect on that. And we also require 1 video reflection per quarter. So, but prior to that, we require they meet, visit each other's classroom, put together a plan, and each quarter they have to submit we call it the mentor record of action. And so that gets submitted online to us through a Google Classroom, which has pluses and minuses. So again, it's a piece of technology that's great when it works well, but doesn't always work that great for everyone. So other than that, we don't have any requirement that they have to interact a certain amount of time. In general, they interact the amount of time they need to interact to get the work done. That's kind of how it works. We can't babysit everyone.
And we've got just about a minute left for this portion. So I was wondering, since a lot of the questions are around social media, and we do have in the framework some suggestions and ideas, I'd love to pull from you all. What have you heard is effective? What things have you heard preferences for? I'm seeing a lot of Facebook and maybe doing private Facebook groups. I know that I've worked with the private Facebook groups, which are a nice way to have kind of a community chat space, and you can have the continuing information, or conversation going. But one of the challenges with Facebook is if there's a mentor or a district facilitator that wants to give information, they can, but sometimes it can get lost in the conversation. So that's one reason Slack was brought up. And that's another reason that even Google Docs or Dropbox paper, having maybe one foundational paper that you constantly go back to, and you could go, okay, all the information is in here. And then we also have a communication social media platform. So maybe Facebook is for asking those questions. And the other reason that we brought up social media in the past was because it might create that community among the mentors and mentees. So let's say that there's a situation that comes up with a mentee that they ask about, and that mentor has never really addressed that situation, but another mentor knows, oh, this happened to me in the past, or I saw another teacher and here's how they solved it. It really opens up that pool of wisdom. So if you would be willing to, if you have thoughts on what social media platforms, if you could jot that down in the chat so we can also include that and look into that. As Jenny, I'm going to skip through these next two questions because we had lots of thoughtful things that were brought up. As Jenny shares what's next for our team.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. Right now, we are just finishing up for, getting the framework in the current format formalized so we can get it out there to the network. And so we're working on that. We've had some last minute edits and things, but we also would like to do a pilot study. And so we're going to refine and finalize any training activities for looking at a pilot. We also want to do a little more work on the compensation plan so we've looked at different states, and you'll see in the framework that we have studied many states who have similar or, kind of attempted programs like this. So we do have a little bit of data about that, but we want to continue to investigate what's out there. We have searched high and low for programs. And then the second phase of this, so we'd like to continue with either a new project team or some of the members continuing on to build a collaborative lesson study for participants, because we think that lesson study is a very good mechanism, but by definition, we felt that it was kind of sensitive in that it has to be well defined, because it is a actual defined mechanism of professional development and not just a catchphrase. So we wanted to make sure we honored that, and we didn't want to just kind of, throw it out there. So we're going to work on looking at how can we build a collaborative lesson study for the participants. What would that look like for STEM? And so that might be part of the work we do. And then also, we're going to reconnect and over the next course of this year and try to move this forward. In our own state, we have a bill, well, it's in its formation stages for funding before the legislature, which will come up in the spring. And so that's my motivation for doing this, is that we're trying to formalize this so that it's a statewide program like they have in Iowa or Colorado. So, maybe, that might be a situation where I can share that with the greater community once we get that as a formalized process for the state. We hope, cross our fingers. So that's what's next. And if you want to join us, if you find this work exciting and you think that you're like, wow, I'd really like to help with this, or, oh, I'd really like to pilot this, please get in touch with us and let us know that. And we will follow up and let you know how you can get involved. And here's all our contact information.
Thank you all so much. Wow, that time went by fast. I'm just feeling really energized and excited. A big thank you to the project team, to Jenny, Jeff, and Melanie for presenting today. And Emily, to your note about contact info, something that we're really excited about, we shared at the beginning of the webinar, that we really hope that this is a jumping off point and a way for the conversation to keep going. So tomorrow, when we send an email to all of you with a link to this webinar recording and also a link to the framework, we're going to actually copy everyone on that email, everyone who's registered for today's webinar. So you can either reply all and keep the conversation going in this space, or you can feel free to find the specific email of the project team leaders, the host today, or someone specific. If you saw something that jumped out in the chat and you want to keep digging in or learn more about that, we'll be able to share that with you tomorrow. So thank you everyone for joining. And I think I'm 99% sure, no, I'm 100% sure that you all should have each gotten an email. So check your inbox right now. There's an email where the subject title is feedback survey. It should have hit your inbox from Team 100K and 10. And we would so very much appreciate you taking the time to complete this survey. It's really helpful for us and our team. We really take your feedback seriously and consider it thoughtfully when we're designing and thinking about how to make webinars like these happen and in collaboration with leaders in the network, such as the project team hosts today. And so just again, we'll be sharing all of this information with you tomorrow in an email, and feel free to forward it on to colleagues who you collaborate with in your state or beyond. We're so glad to be able to create this platform for the framework to have legs and keep living. And just a quick shout out, you'll see in the chat, our colleague Yasmin shared a link to a workshop that's happening here in New York. So feel free to click that link and learn more. And that's all, folks. We do have more webinars available, and again, you'll get the recording that has the slide in it as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. And big thanks to the project team. Awesome job today.
Thank you.
Yay.